Mr. Schnurr, thank you for talking about principles. Senator Hatch and I have a bill we've introduced for recruitment and training of principals. And I just want to talk to you or ask you about, obviously the teachers are the most important thing, but you're talking about how principals basically recruit teachers themselves and create the ethos in the school and are responsible for leading in the school. And yet we really have put very, very, very little focus on the training of principals. And part of what our bill does is create a kind of a residency where you spend a year, if you're an aspiring principal or a principal who wants to become a better principal, with a principal who has successfully turned a school around. Is that a model that you've seen that has worked, and what is your, and this is open to anybody, obviously, but I just thought I'd go with you.
Yes, Senator Franken, thank you for your leadership. The legislation that you've introduced and Senator Hatch has introduced on school leadership, I think, is an exemplar of what can be done in school leadership. New Leaders for New Schools, we run principal-based, residency-based principal training programs in 10 states across the country. We select 7% of applicants. We invest a year of training as a residency with a great principal, several years of coaching on the job. So we've studied very carefully as an action tank at New Leaders. We say it's not a think tank, but being in the action tank of being in lots of schools, lots of data, what have we learned? The big message I'd give you is I think the results from the training programs with residencies are the principals are getting better results than the school systems they're in. I think it's a wise investment. I think your legislation's focus on performance and tracking that data on achievement, on retention, and using that to sort of determine whether on an ongoing basis you'd fund programs in a performance-based way is great, not only for accountability, but driving the continuous improvement that we're seeing in our programs. So thank you.
And this all comes down to, in every aspect of this, and teachers, everything, on evaluation and how you evaluate. And I think that's something other senators are going to want to get into. But what I heard as a common theme was to use the evaluation of teachers and principals as a part of the development, just as the evaluation that we're talking about in terms of growth models for kids, that the students, the evaluation of how the kids are doing, be used as a way of teaching, be used diagnostically, be able to be used by teachers, so that the assessment process and the evaluation process are part of the learning process. That's not a question, but that's a point.
I assume that all the people who have their things up want to respond on point to Senator Franken's. I try to keep these in order, so we'll start with Weingarten, and then Benbow, Moyer, Parmenter, Kane, and Fessmeyer. All on point on this. Is it a question or a statement?
It was, look, I think Senator Franken is absolutely right. I mean, we have spent a bunch of time looking at this issue, as has Senator Bennett and Senator Reed. Both of them have put together incredibly powerful bills on how to focus on teacher evaluation. They do it a little bit differently, but both of them should be commended for the bills that they've put in terms of looking at this. The issue, though, is it has to be teacher development and evaluation, and it has to be done in a continuous model in some ways, just like the speaker all the way to the left, John, has said, because if you just simply look at evaluation, then it becomes a gotcha, and it becomes the end of the road, not at the beginning of the road. But the continuous model that Tom Kane was talking about is also important, because if you're only looking at data, particularly data on what is still very flawed tests. The testing systems that we have these days are still quite flawed. We have to look at multiple measures. We have to look at teacher practice. We have to inform that practice, and then we have to look at evidence of student learning. So what we're actually trying to get districts to do is to see if we can get 25 to 50 districts this year with their unions, like Douglas County in Colorado, to actually start building and developing those kind of continuous development and improvement evaluation systems. And ultimately, if we get that, it will work.
Okay, Ms. Benbow, could you
Yes.
weigh in on this?
The Principal Leadership Academy of Nashville does exactly what you're describing. We take aspiring principals and sitting principals. In the summer, they have an intensive experience with us where they learn about learning, because principals should be leaders of learning. They learn about how to create change, and of course, other aspects too. Very intensive. Then it's a year-long program where they are attached to a mentor, an experienced principal who has been effective. They also have a project. The program continues throughout the year. They meet monthly to reflect on their practice, what they're learning, and then it continues for one more year beyond that. We've been doing this with Nashville in a cohort fashion for over 10 years. We have trained almost all principals coming through, but it's been extremely effective. It's been done with partnership with the Nashville schools, so they were part of the design team. And I think I mentioned this in my comments because I think it is an example of effective practice. So I encourage you to push forward with your efforts. Thank you.
Ms. Moyer?
Yes, I wanted to just add, I think we've underestimated for all these years the critical importance of principals. Principal development, principal recruitment, selection, support, and development is hugely important. I think your bill and that of Senator Reid's are just so incredibly important to not forget principal development. Linking teacher evaluation, just as you just heard, around this continuous improvement, not just as an end in its own, but as a way for teachers and principals to learn how to become better faster. The last point I want to make, and it's really tied also to your comment and question, Senator Harkin, is that, you know, who leaves teaching within the first 3 to 5 years, and why are they leaving? Well, we're not exactly sure who's leaving, but I would hazard to guess that it's some of your top candidates are the ones that are leaving because they're very frustrated with the system. But our teaching and learning conditions indicate that the top 3 reasons why teachers are leaving are, number 1 is because of the principal, lack of solid leadership in the school. The second reason they're leaving is because there aren't good leadership opportunities for them. And third, they're leaving because of a lack of mentoring and induction.
Mr. Parmenter?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that last statement. As principals, we definitely need to step up and make sure that we're doing a good job in teacher evaluation systems, giving teachers feedback so that they can improve. There's no question about that. But I would also argue that we're a fairly young group demographically, nationally, and we're going to need some training. I thought about if I had to go to a really high poverty school. We have some poverty, but say, for example, you said to me, I've got to go to a high poverty school, not a great parent support. You know, you can imagine all the different demographics you can get, how difficult it would be. That would be a terribly daunting thing to do. So I think we need training in how to turn schools around, especially if they're low. Again, the other place I mentioned is early literacy. We're going to have to find our way a little bit on this one, but the total number of days of staff development I've had provided to me in my district over 10 years of being a principal is about 2. And I go out and I get staff development. It's not like I don't, but as far, and it's kind of a rural school thing. We have 3 principals in our entire school district. So I've got to go out to get it. It's expensive, it's time consuming, I'm away from the building. So we do need to provide, in my mind, a funding source that will help us be better at what we do. I think there's no lack of desire on the part of teachers or principals to do a great job. Sometimes, I think we do about the best we know how to do, all of us. So a little bit more training, I think, a lot more training.
Well, now, let's see. I want to move ahead to other senators. Go ahead. Mr. King, Ms. Fesmar, on this point.
The most important decision a principal makes is whether or not to tenure a teacher. And yet today, without any objective information, principals tenure pretty much anybody who's willing to stick around the classroom 2 or 3 years. They punt. So actually, I think the most powerful thing we could do to help help principals do their job is to give them better objective data on the performance of their teachers and to empower them to make the tough decisions that we're expecting them to make.
I'm really going to be quick. The reason I think that we've had such success in my district is because our principals have been expected to be a part of the curricular reform that we have in our district. So our principals attend all of the professional development that their staff attends. We have continuous improvement and advisory days built into our school calendar that our principals are a part of grade level meetings. They work with instructional coaches. And, you know, I've been teaching a long time, and I will be a long time more. But what I have seen about principal effectiveness is my principal no longer sees himself as a CEO, as a manager. He sees himself as the instructional leader in my building. And I think that's what's made a huge difference in our school district, is having those principals part of the professional development that's happening.
Yes, Ms. Hurst.
Thank you. And I just want to follow up on that comment to say, in addition to a great preparation program, great school systems ensure that there's professional development for principals as a leadership group, and then great school districts expect principals to participate in their school professional development with their teachers. Teachers need to see that principals prioritize what they expect to see happen in classrooms.
I just think that growth is an important model here. And do you guys, does everyone know McNamaras Fallacy? Is that familiar? McNamaras Fallacy, because you mentioned, Mr. Kane, talking about results of tests of things that can be measured. And McNamaras Fallacy is that things that can be easily measured will be measured and will be considered important. And things that can't be measured easily will not be measured and will not be considered important. So what we measure is reading scores and math scores, but what we don't measure are the other things that are just hard to measure. And people don't consider them important anymore. So critical thinking or creativity or all the other kinds of intelligence that we really, that employers that I talk to want from students, from graduates, those we aren't measuring. And it's really interesting that today's discussion has talked about evaluating principals. And evaluating principals, you have to evaluate how their teachers have done. To evaluate teachers, you have to evaluate how the students have done. So it all boils down to how we make these assessments. And so that's what we've gotten down to today, and that's what that's what we're going to, it's a huge deal, what we're figuring out as we reauthorize ESEA.
Mm-hmm.